Hey loves, it's Britt, and in this video I'm going to talk about what it means to have your Mars square or opposite to someone's Pluto in Synastry, this dangerous aspect. We're going to talk about this, which I'm not surprised this was requested. This is definitely one of the more intense, potentially scary aspects you could have in your Synastry relationship chart comparison with someone. Now, it doesn't have to be a deal breaker if it's also coinciding with other, amazing aspects that are easier to deal with. But even with that, it should be, it should be said to tread with caution, or like this particular aspect or these two particular aspects should come with a warning label. There's certain Synastry aspects or composite chart aspects that I believe should be talked about, and yeah, you should be warned. You should be, and not coming from fear, but just coming from awareness that this could be an extremely challenging, potentially toxic or difficult relationship. It doesn't have to be. It just depends on other factors, the two natal potentials. Is there a potential for violence or manipulation or toxic behavior coming from the individuals? And anybody could really exhibit toxic behavior, but you want to look at the natal potentials, and you want to just advise the client or advise the friend or advise yourself that this could potentially be dangerous. So let's talk about it. So Mars in our natal chart is our aggression, our sex drive, how we go after what we want. It's the more unthinking, impulsive part of us, how we act instinctively, and our masculine energy, or a part of our masculine energy. And then Pluto is our deep unconscious compulsions and drives and fears, and how we transform our power, our personal power. So it's more impersonal than Mars. Mars is one of the personal planets. So Pluto in this instance can have a lot of power over the Mars person. The Mars person at times could even feel downright fear or terror around the Pluto person. And these contacts are so strange. You'll notice this with certain Pluto contacts. You can even have like rapid heartbeat, like you could be literally terrified, like as if a bear is coming to attack you. It's funny, we have bears around here. They're not out right now. But I'm just imagining the way that it would feel if like a bear was like lunging at me. That's how it can feel with Mars-Pluto Synastry. And the hard aspects, the square and the opposition, are pretty similar. I will describe them differently as well in this video, but they're pretty similar, like so much so that I can just lump them into one video. They're going to be the more challenging, the more difficult, because with the square, we're going to have that constant tension. We're constantly butting heads. There's friction. It's definitely, there can be passion, but we're constantly going to be getting at each other and fighting with that aspect. Or even if we're not fighting, we're not compatible. We're testing each other constantly. We're butting heads, right? The opposition is going to be a more off and on dynamic. Maybe sometimes the Pluto person is going to totally submit their Pluto and get along with Mars and be more easygoing, and Mars is going to have more of the power. So with the opposition, it's more that there's like a switch where, sometimes Pluto's totally dominating, sometimes they're not. It kind of switches to who has the power. But Pluto mostly does have the power or have the upper hand in this contact, and that drives Mars crazy. That the anger that the Mars person can feel at Pluto is so beyond this lifetime. And this definitely, it could be considered a karmic aspect. Like, this doesn't just show up. I mean, unless you have this aspect natally, then you're going to have it with everybody that's close to your birthday. That's not as significant. When you have a certain natal aspect and then you experience that aspect with basically any synastry of people born close to you, that's not going to be as significant as when we don't have the aspect natally and we're experiencing it only with another person in the synastry, right? It's still significant to experience a natal aspect, but it's just like, it's not personal to that person, right? You're going to experience it with anybody that is born in your same age group, basically. So, yeah, the Mars person can feel just so much anger and rage and burning, seething passion even at the Pluto person. And, in some cases, you'll find that there is a high level of sexual attraction. It could be so intense. It could feel more intense than anything you've ever felt. But it's not going to take very long for the people to realize that as much passion and sexual energy that they have, there's also a conflict. There's also anger. There's also frustration. There's also, for Pluto even, there's very deep wounding and pain. And that's where the anger comes from with Pluto, is that the Mars person, by just acting impulsively and instinctively and being themselves, just triggers that Pluto wound in a major way. So you want to look at the Pluto person's natal Pluto to see what is being triggered there, because this is going to be massively triggering to the Pluto person. And the Pluto person's anger can come from that they can feel violated, but Mars can feel violated too. In difficult Pluto contacts, we can sometimes feel like, like we are losing our power. And, by entertaining in a relationship, entertaining a relationship that has aspects like this, it's like they're both at fault kind of with this aspect, but you will see more that Pluto, if this is an abusive situation, Pluto can abuse Mars. Pluto can want to own Mars. Pluto can have the power or have the upper hand or have some sort of control over the Mars person's actions, the Mars person's sexual energy. In a toxic relationship, this can get pretty nasty and ugly. Now, in an otherwise healthy relationship with other easier synastry and compatibility, this aspect is just going to add a level of passion and intensity that is unmatched to probably any other relationship ever that you've had. And also, it's more than just that. It's also a psychological cataclysm, or your inside, specifically the Pluto person, is going to go through a major internal transformation, possibly an external transformation too. So in a healthy relationship, this aspect will just add this extra level of plutonic energy where the people are going to transform. The Pluto is going to be forced by the Mars person's day-to-day actions and just how they are instinctively, their sexual energy. The Pluto person is going to be triggered into this Pluto wound, and if they're a more plutonic, scorpionic type, that could be comfortable, that could be natural, and that could just give them even an extra boost on gaining the clarity around their deepest pain and also their power. So this could be an aspect of a power couple. I don't want to make it sound like it's has to be negative every single time, right? This could be an aspect of a power couple. They definitely have a lot of energy together. They probably are quite dominating in the world even. You can see that with Mars square Pluto in the composite chart too, where they, as a couple, the way you combine is you dominate the world and other people. And the synastry is not so much what you do to the outer world, but just internally, what you do to each other. You make each other more dominant. You make each other more feisty and fiery. And so, for certain personalities, that could be good, but there is tension, right? There is always going to be tension. There's probably going to be fights. I would be very surprised, and you can let me know in the comments, but I would be very surprised to know if someone had this aspect in their synastry with their long-term partner and did not fight ever. I would just be really surprised. I mean, it could happen with other things and the right kind of people, maybe if they had it natally and they've done a lot of work on themselves. But usually this is going to be an aspect of fighting and ego conflicts, because Mars represents like the childlike ego, and, Mars doesn't want to be pushed around by Pluto. That's why this aspect can be so much more violent than even Venus-Pluto or Moon-Pluto or Sun-Pluto can, but even not so much, because Mars is so instinctual, and with Mars you don't hold back, and especially if you have a particularly feisty Mars, when Pluto is squaring you or opposing you like this, you just want to freaking kill them. Like it's ugly, it's so you could even see this in very violent or scary relationships, and often you will see it. Like I always like to look up charts of relationships that have become violent, and you will often see Mars square or opposite to Pluto in their synastry. Like that is it's definitely a marker of that. So it needs to be advised, right? It's definitely like a handle with care, handle with caution aspect. But with other good synastry, the right people, it doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but it is very difficult, and there will be ego conflicts. Mars doesn't really want to be bossed around by Pluto, but if they can realize that they do this to each other, right? Like if you're an astrologer, you have this aspect, or you're advising someone and they have this aspect, you gotta let each other win sometimes. You gotta you probably have to fight. You have to let off steam. You have to have wild and crazy sex that's physically exhausting, and then you're probably going to be all right, as long as someone can back down some of the time, right? And then this is just going to be a very psychologically healing, and like there can be a lot of internal growth from this type of relationship. Many of my first heartbreaks, I had like my Moon and Mars are conjunct, but I had my first boyfriends that were 2 years older than me had Pluto exact square to my Moon and Mars, and these relationships did not last long term, but those first heartbreak, psychologically it was very valuable. It taught me a lot about my Leo Mars and Moon, and it was definitely a lot of anger, a lot of emotions provoked, right? But I have Moon and Mars conjunct, so when it's just Mars, it's going to be a little bit different. But it definitely can be valuable to go through a relationship that has an aspect like this, if you're the right kind of person for it. But a lot of people are just going to find it too intimidating and even downright terrifying. Your blood can be pumping, your heart can be racing. Mars can be terrified of Pluto, and Pluto can feel actually very uncomfortable with Mars as well. It's so crazy. It's so interesting, the level of fear and distrust that can happen here. So it's not a very comfy, cozy vibe at all. But if you do have it in your relationship, you're going to get a lot of growth out of it, and hopefully you're both mature enough and emotionally centered enough that it doesn't have to get super ugly, but it can. So I hope this was helpful, you guys. I was gonna differ a little bit between the square and the opposition, but I kind of already did, right? The opposition is more off on, and the square is more like constant tension. Which one would be worse? I know you guys are probably gonna ask that. Probably the square. Usually if I'm asked what's worse, the square or an opposition, it's always going to be the square, because the opposition has more potential for resolution because we are more alike, right? Because we're opposing. We actually have what the other needs. But the square, we're just constantly butting heads. With the square, that tension can lead to even faster growth, right? Because we're not constantly going back and forth and flip-flop. Like, we are just constantly having that tension. So anyways, yeah. It's kind of a long video. There's a lot to say about this aspect, so I'd love to know your experience of this one in the comments, you guys. Thanks for your requests. Let me know if you have any other requests. Drop them in the comments. I'll add them to my list. And thanks for watching, you guys. Talk soon. Bye.